Hi, my name is Sumesh Balakrishnan, and joining with me is Anna McCullum from the product management team. Welcome to the session about Streamline database monitoring with remote agents. Our agenda for today's session will focus on addressing the challenges faced by the administrators in agent lifecycle management, exploring the capabilities of remote target monitoring. We will review the remote monitoring topology and remote agent deployment setup, and we will see how to add remote host target for monitoring. Finally, we will review how to discover and monitor targets. Let's review some of the lifecycle management challenges that administrators are facing today. We believe at a macro level there are three key challenges. The first challenge is agent complexity. One of the key challenges in agent lifecycle management is the complexity of managing agents across different geographies and heterogeneous platform. In upgraded environments, there may be multiple agent versions requiring careful management and lifecycle operations. Securing agents for secure communication adds an additional layer of complexity. The second challenge is tied to configuration pollution. With numerous variants of agents created by different users, it becomes challenging to manage and maintain consistency across configurations. Also, configuration variations increases the risk of misconfiguration and can lead to higher support cost. The third challenge is tied to agent maintenance. Keeping agents up to date with the latest patches and upgrades poses significant maintenance challenges. Also, administrators often spend a lot of time in managing and maintaining the agents. These challenges highlight the need for a streamlined and efficient approach to agent lifecycle management, which the remote agent aims to address. So, the primary goal for remote agent is to facilitate effective remote monitoring and management of targets without the need for deploying a local agent on the host. So that means resource reduction is one of the main thing. Since there is no need to deploy agent on every host for target monitoring, the overall agent footprint is reduced. Also, it increases the efficiency as the remote agent can handle and monitor large number of remote targets spread across multiple regions. It helps administrators in managing and maintaining the health of the targets. The next is streamlined monitoring and management. So here all database discovery options are supported, and it's not only the monitoring that is supported with the remote agents, the management operations such as provisioning, patching are also supported with remote agents. And then finally, high availability support for remote agents. So in order to address the agent failure, we have added high availability support. That means when the primary remote agent goes down, there is a standby remote agent that takes care of monitoring the critical targets. And these functionalities are coming up in the RUs of 24.1. Let's delve into the topology of remote target monitoring using remote agents. Here, we will explore the steps involved in deploying the remote agent on a remote host and how it enables to monitor and manage targets efficiently. So to begin with, here we have Enterprise Manager 24 already deployed. We now have a remote host that we want to provision the remote agent. This host is sized properly to support remote agent deployment. Here for the deployment, we will make use of the agent push mechanism from the OMS to deploy the remote agent on the remote host. So for this purpose, the SSH connection is established so that the OMS can transfer the agent software onto the remote host and the remote agent will be configured or deployed on that host. Now let's consider a scenario where we have two remote hosts, host 1 and host 2, with database 1 and database 2 deployed on them. We will explore how to remotely add and monitor these database targets to the remote agent. The addition of remote host to the remote agent is initiated from the remote agent. And on the remote host, the remote cache and remote cache SBIN directories are created. The detailed content of these directories will be discussed in later slides. Once the remote hosts are added to the agent, it'll start monitoring them. For direct connectivity or to manage targets, the OMS established a direct connectivity where OMS directly connects to the remote database for monitoring. And here you can see the different various communication channel that happens, like OMS to the target connectivity, direct connectivity, and SSH connection from the OMS for remote agent deployment, and SSH connection from the remote agent to remote host for monitoring. So here, let me share with you the simplified and efficient process for monitoring remote targets with remote agent. So here the process consists of 3 simple steps. The first step is to deploy remote agent. So here we support agent push, agent pull, and EMCLI methods for deploying remote agents. The second step is to add remote host targets to remote agent. And final step is to discover and monitor targets. So let's review the first step of deploying remote agents. So before we deploy the remote agent, let's review some of the prerequisite checks. The first, it's important to note that the remote agent is currently supported only on the Linux x64 platform. So when designating a host for remote agent, make sure it does not contain any targets like databases. The host should be empty, allowing the remote agents to monitor the host itself. Now let's review some of the best practices for deploying the remote agent. The first, database and its family of targets are supported by remote agent for monitoring and management. In the initial phase, remote agent lifecycle is supported through the patch plan. Gold image based patching will come in the future release updates. It is crucial to select a new host specifically for remote agent deployment when setting up remote target monitoring. Existing local agents cannot be converted into remote agents. It will come in the future RUs of 24.1. Sizing guidelines will be published for deploying remote agents on the remote host. So here we will explore the setup process for deploying remote agent using agent push mechanism. It's the same user experience as we maintain consistency with the existing agent push method. So let's walk through the steps involved in deploying the remote agent. So when deploying the remote agent, you will notice that we have preserved the familiar user experience. That is, in the Add Targets manually page, you will find an option to install the remote agent. So here, we also have supported the EMCLI and silent method for remote agent deployment. So once the remote agent is successfully deployed, you can review the deployment results by clicking on View Remote Agent and Host Addition Results. So let's see how to add remote host targets to the remote agent that we have deployed in the step 1. Again, let's go over some of the prerequisite checks before we go and add the remote host to the remote agent for monitoring. First, it is important to note that Linux x64 platform is supported for remote host addition to the remote agent. In future, we will add more platform support. The next is about the SSH connection. The SSH connection should be enabled from the remote agent to all the remote hosts that will be added to the remote agent for monitoring. Also, sudo configuration. A passwordless sudo configuration is required from the remote host to the remote agent for monitoring and management. And we also have a limitation that in the initial phase, Power Broker option is not supported for adding remote host to the remote agent. Let's look into the UI flow for adding remote host to the remote agent. So first, in this UI, you need to select the remote agent that you want the remote host to be added. Second is about the host monitoring credentials. This is the normal OS host name credential that supports SSH key based and username password combination. These credentials will be used for monitoring. All metric collections will use this credential. The OS user specified in the monitoring credential has the same requirement as the remote agent install user in regular EM agent installation. That is, your user should be part of the OS group. The next is about the host admin credentials. This is the root credential for the remote host. This also supports SSH key based and username and password combination. This credential will be used for remote cache management of root owned executables. That is, the SBIN contents that will be explained in the later section are stored here. We also require the PDB settings and SSH port open on the host. Either you can pre-create this credential or you can click on the plus icon to create a new one while you are adding the remote host to remote agent. The next is about the remote cache. A remote cache location on remote host is a cache of scripts, archives and monitoring utilities and application metadata and monitoring executables and utilities needed for monitoring and management of targets on the target host. The remote agent will also initiate a scheduled task that will maintain this cache. There is a scheduled task that checks if a cache needs to be updated or not. And the remote cache contents will have something like utilities like zip and unzip, archives like jar files, and scripts like admin scripts. And we need the minimum space required for remote cache location on the remote host is 1 GB. The next is the remote cache SBIN. This directory contains the SBIN contents that needs to be pushed to a directory that is owned by root and writable only by root. The remote cache SBIN location contains utilities such as nmo, sudo, nmg, ssh, etc. This is the location of the root-owned content on the remote host. The agent may need certain root-owned executables for remote target monitoring. And finally, you click on Add button to add all your remote host to get added to the remote agent for monitoring. So in the previous screen, all the user inputs are captured for adding remote host to the remote agent, and this screen shows all the user inputs. And if it is all fine, you can click on submit, and then we submit a job where all the remote host will get added to the remote agent for monitoring. We also have a EMCLA option for you to execute. Instead of going through the UI, you can use EMCLA to add remote host to the remote agent for monitoring. So once you submit the add remote host to remote agent, the job gets submitted, and here you can see some of the prereq checks that get executed, and you can verify if there are any failures, you can fix it, and you can retry, and you can see that all the steps are executed and the remote hosts are added to the remote agent for monitoring. So at this stage, the remote agent is deployed and the remote host is added to the remote agent for monitoring. Now let's move on to the next step involving in managing and in patching the remote agent for performance and security. So here you can see on the Manage Cloud Control page, we allow you to distinguish whether it's a normal agent or it's a remote agent. So we have added a new column called agent type where you can filter the number of remote agents that you have in your system, and you can also see the normal agents that are there in the system. So it is also important that once the remote agents are in the system, it is important to keep them patched with the regular release updates. This ensures that the remote agents are up to date with the latest patches, maintaining compatibility with the JDK and also necessary custom configurations. Example, you can update remote agents with the higher cipher suits, and then you can also patch the agents with the JDK to keep up with the certified JDK version for the remote agents. So here I transition or we come to the last step on how to discover and monitor targets using remote agents. So to go over this section in detail, let me turn it over to Anna McCallum, to take to talk about how to discover and monitor targets using remote agents. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks, Umesh. Before we discuss target discovery, let's first get an overview of the end state for monitoring your database targets using the remote agent. Let's say you have these databases monitored in EM. Some of your databases are in one data center, and you have other databases in a second data center. In addition, let's say you have your primary database and its ASM and listener targets in your first data center and its standby in a second data center. Here are the general guidelines for setting up monitoring. A database and its related targets should be monitored by the same remote agent if they are in close network proximity to the agent. If they are not in close network proximity to the agent, such as the standby database, which is in a different data center, then we recommend that you use another remote agent in that data center to monitor those targets. Using these guidelines, we use Remote Agent 1 in Data Center 1 to monitor the primary database and its related listener and ASM targets, as well as the other databases in Data Center 1. We don't use Remote Agent 1 to monitor the standby because it is not close in network proximity to Remote Agent 1. Instead, we use another agent, Remote Agent 2, in Data Center 2 to monitor the standby database because it is in close network proximity to the standby. Here are the general steps for discovering a database and its related targets. First, determine the agents that will be used to monitor these targets. Choose the agent that is in close network proximity to your targets. The same remote agent can remotely monitor many targets. Next, add or discover all of the hosts of the database and its related targets to the same agent you chose in the prior step. For example, if you're discovering a 2-node rack, add both nodes or hosts of the rack database to the agent. Next, add the database targets using the same discovery workflow that you would use if you were using a local agent. For database discovery, all options are supported, including auto discovery, guided discovery, manual discovery, or discovery using EMCLI. As an example, let's walk through the guided process discovery workflow. Assuming we've already added or discovered the hosts of our databases, we now choose the Oracle Cluster and High Availability Service. Next, it will ask us to choose the host on which the cluster resides. Here we choose our host, which we've already added as a monitored host to the remote agent. The remaining discovery workflow hasn't changed. Fill in cluster target property details such as scan name, scan port, etc., and follow the next steps to discover the cluster and the high availability service targets. Now let's discover the Oracle database. In the guided workflow, we choose Oracle Database, FARSync, Listener, and ASM. Next, we are asked to choose the host on which these targets reside. We choose the host which we've already added as a target using the remote agent. The remaining steps of the discovery workflow remain the same. It will go through the process of discovering the database instances, ASM instances, which can later be promoted as targets in Enterprise Manager. After discovery, all database monitoring features that you already use with local agents will work the same way when using the remote agents. These include metrics and thresholds, monitoring templates, metric extensions, corrective actions, blackouts, etc. Hence, your existing monitoring setup that includes all of your monitoring artifacts, monitoring templates, metric extensions, corrective actions, all of these will work seamlessly in the same way using the remote agent. With the remote agent, in addition to monitoring, We also support performance diagnostics, jobs, and management operations such as backup, data guard failover, switchover, etc. All of our database target types are supported with these operations. Now let's talk about remote host monitoring using the remote agent. Remote monitoring of a host begins when the host target is added to the remote agent, as Sumesh discussed earlier. The host page, as shown here, identifies which hosts are remotely monitored. If a host goes down and is monitored by a local agent, then the agent, host, and its targets go into agent unreachable status. If a host goes down and is monitored by a remote agent, which can still be up, or if there are connectivity issues between the remote agent and the host, then the host goes into host unreachable status. The status of the targets on the host will be in error. The jobs for the host and its monitored targets will be retried until it hits the maximum number of retries, and then will be set to job status failed if the job has not been successfully executed. You can create an incident and send notifications for host unreachable status for the host targets. If the remote agent or its host go down, then the monitored targets go into agent unreachable status, which is similar to what you would see with the local agent. With the remote agent, you can streamline monitoring. A smaller set of remote agents can monitor a large set of targets at scale, with reduced efforts needed to maintain a smaller set of agents. There is an overall reduction of resource consumption across your managed target hosts, since hosts no longer need co-located agents. With less agents to manage, administrators can focus more time on other tasks such as database monitoring and management. With detailed auditing and reporting features, administrators can easily track and manage the lifecycle of remote agents. Thanks for joining our session today. Here are links to additional resources to learn more about Oracle Enterprise Manager.